Hi, my name's Mel and welcome back to my YouTube channel Bookish Brummy. So I recently mentioned in previous videos that I'm currently in my Stephen King era. So it seemed like a really good time to talk about the two films that have just been released based on Stephen King books. We've had The Life of Chuck, which was released in August, and that was based off the short story The Life of Chuck in the If It Bleeds short story collection. And then in September we've had The Long Walk, which is based on the Long Walk book, which was written by Stephen King in the 70s. Now, this video really is going to be discussing The Long Walk because I feel like there's a lot more differences between the book and the film in comparison to The Life of Chuck. But I just thought it was worth mentioning The Life of Chuck while we're here because these two films have been released so closely together. Now, when I went into the cinemas to watch these two films, I was actually expecting to enjoy The Long Walk more than The Life of Chuck, but that's not actually what happened. I've enjoyed the Life of Chuck film more than I enjoyed The Long Walk, and I think that's because The Life of Chuck did adhere to the short story almost completely. I mean, I didn't really see many differences in there, and there were like some slight differences, but nothing that really changed the outcome of the story. Whereas with The Long Walk, there was a lot of differences, so I am aware that people are beginning to talk about that now, or did start talking about that a couple of weeks ago after the release of the film, so I just wanted to be included in that discussion really. So this year I've listened to the audiobook, I've read the book, and I've now watched the film. So I've seen it in three different media, so definitely feel like I can talk about The Long Walk a fair bit. So I'll start with the audiobook because obviously there's not really going to be much difference, or there is no difference, between the story being read by audiobook compared to what you're going to read. So I listened to the audiobook when I was going on a trail marathon training exercise, because that's just my sense of humour to think, yeah, let's watch, like, listen to The Long Walk while I do that. And during that run, it was actually quite quiet. There were not a lot of people that were partaking in the race, so I didn't have anything else to concentrate on. I didn't have people making noise around me, and there was no traffic because I was running in the hills, so I could focus on the audiobook quite well. The struggle, I think, with that was that there's 100 walkers in the book, and they're all boys. And there's a fair few of them that are having conversations with each other. Conversation is just flying back and forth. It's not just like, you know, one character talking to another character solidly for the whole book. And with that being said, there's only one narrator. So he's trying to, you know, narrate all of these conversations going back and forth for all of the same gender character. And I have to admit, like, I got a little bit lost. So I'd enjoyed the story, but the execution of it through audiobook I think could be much improved probably if they had maybe a couple of narrators, just to make it a bit more distinctive about who's talking and when. So that's really all I have to say about the audiobook. Because I'd listened to that first, I'd probably rated the story about 3.5 stars. But then when I actually read the book, the rating actually went up then because it became a lot clearer to me who was saying what and when, and so it sort of made a lot more sense. So I think, you know, after that I'd probably rate it like a 4.25, a 4.5 for the story. So this video is going to contain spoilers, so if you plan on watching The Long Walk or on reading The Long Walk and you don't want to know the outcome at the end, or, you know, details of what's happening, then probably you don't want to be watching this video, because there's no way for me to really compare the two without talking in detail about what's happening in the story. So essentially in The Long Walk, it's I suppose it's slightly dystopian, but it's not set in the future or anything. I mean, this book was actually written in the 70s, and in the story, you know, it's not indicated that it's happening in the future, or anything like that. So it's still in the modern time from when it was written, but it's imagining human suffering for entertainment in a way, I suppose, which is something that I think sort of picked up probably in the 90s and the 2000s, when we came to probably watching reality TV. And while in The Long Walk, that's not exactly what's going on, but it's sort of a similar vein. So essentially 100 boys who are about 18 19 years old. They all go into a ballot. Well, actually, there's more than 100 that go into a ballot, actually, like probably over 1,000 go into a ballot, but 100 are picked out to take part in what's called the Long Walk. And they could be walking hundreds and hundreds of miles, and essentially the aim of this is to be the last man standing. And then the last man standing wins a wish of whatever they want. And I think that they also get some financial reimbursement as well. But they can wish for, you know, whatever they want when they get to the end of that walk that might make a difference to their life. So, you know, I think they could wish for all the money in the world for the rest of their lives and never have to work again, if that's what they wanted. But I suppose that the sad thing about it is that it's young boys that have to apply for this. So it's sort of, as I say, 18, 19-year-olds, and they don't entirely know what they're signing up for. So they sort of read the terms and conditions, and they know that essentially if they lose, they're going to die. The only winner in it is the person who is the last man standing, because essentially they have to maintain a speed in the book of 4 miles per hour, and if they drop below that speed, they're going to get shot. And that's where I sort of bring in the whole sport for entertainment. Now, there aren't a huge amount of spectators, but the ending of it is televised in America. So America know that 99 young men have been shot and died, and, you know, the penultimate person is going to die on TV, essentially, so that the winner is, you know, paraded as the winner on live TV. So that's, you know, really, really, really shocking. But it's also the fact that they are so young. So can they really make that decision at the start of it to, you know, think my life is worth trying for this wish? You know, and you would think, oh, all of these boys probably come from really poor backgrounds or really bad backgrounds. That's why they would take part in this challenge. And I think in the book it becomes quite apparent, like, that's not actually the case. Some of them just outright say, like, they're doing it because they don't really know what else to do with themselves, or they feel that it's expected of them to take part in the Long Walk. And I do wonder in some way if this is Stephen King sort of having a metaphor for joining the army, you know, because you can sign up for the army. I mean, it used to be, I think, when you were 16, and now it might be 18, I'm not sure, in the UK at least. But really, can somebody who's still mentally developing make that decision? And that's probably a bit of a political discussion that I don't really want to get into now, but I can see the sort of parallel where the Long Walk could, you know, be some kind of a metaphor for that. Now, in the film, there's actually only 50 walkers, but in the book there's 100. And I don't really know why they cut down the amount of walkers. I mean, it might have just been to make it less confusing with the amount of conversations and characters that were going on. But personally, I think it was probably harder to walk down 100 people than it is 50. So I did prefer the fact that there were more walkers in the book compared to the film. Now, one of the things that gets spoken about all the time, and I noticed this when I listened to the audiobook and read the book, is the speed that they have to walk in order to, you know, remain in the game and not get shot. So in the book, it's written down as 4 miles per hour. As a runner, I know that if somebody's going to be walking 4 miles an hour, they're basically in a slow jog. And I have to admit, when I was reading this, I was thinking, like, well, they're not really on a long walk, are they? They're on a jog. They're on an ultra-marathon jog, basically, to do 4 miles an hour. And my average walking speed for a mile, if I'm going at a fair clip, is probably about 17 to 18 minutes per mile, which means that I can probably walk just over 3 miles an hour. So for me to do 4, yeah, I would have to go into a jog. So I did notice in the film that they had dropped that to 3 miles per hour, which is a lot more reasonable, and that is actually something that I could, you know, achieve with my walking speed. And I believe that they've asked Stephen King about this. It's not really that big of a deal. I just think that when he wrote the book, he didn't really consider what an actual walking pace speed was. So I actually think the change in the film was probably for the better, because I think had it been televised at 4 miles per hour, I mean, the film is going to reach a much bigger audience than the book did. Immediately, people would have said, absolutely no way is everybody walking 4 miles an hour. So I do think that that was a change for the good. I think that I don't know whether to talk about the ending first. I think I might talk about the ending last because that's obviously where some of the bigger changes were made. But I did notice in the film that Ray Garrity, who is, I suppose, the main character, who you're in the book with Ray Garrity, you are in his head. So the story is told from his perspective and how he's feeling throughout it. And the film is the same. It starts off with Ray Garrity, and it's basically following his journey from the start line close to the end line. And I think that in the film, Ray Garrity is sort of shown to be an all-American hero in a way. You know, he's a really good kid. He gets on with everybody. He immediately makes friends. He's empathetic to everybody. Will happily give people his food. He's happy to like risk getting a warning, you know, to help his fellow walkers. And it almost like he doesn't really seem to have a regard for the fact that by helping his fellow walkers, he's actually helping the people that he is trying to beat in order so that he can live. You know, and he just comes across as a really nice guy, I think. And I think that that was intentional in the film. In the book, this is not as such the case. So it's not that Ray Garrity is portrayed as a nasty person in the book. He's not. But I think that he is more a usual 18-year-old teenager. You know, he's just a normal boy who's joined a walk. You know, he doesn't have any particular ulterior motives for joining the walk. You know, he's not uncaring, so he does care about those around him, but you can hear his inner frustrations more at the characters, you know, the ones that he doesn't like, the ones that he'd probably like to die, and things like that. So you can hear like the monologue going on in his head, and it just makes him seem more normal, I think. You know, the only person that he sort of really wants to help constantly is McReese. And that's because he strikes up quite a close friendship with McReese at first, and then, you know, later on they have to agree that they need to let each other lose if that's going to be the case, because only one of them can win. And I'd say that that's true in the book and in the film, that they have that close friendship. But with regards to everybody else around him, you know, he's not this, you know, let me just bend over and help you so you can beat me person, which is kind of how he comes across in the film. And the other thing in the book that just does not come across in the film at all is his sexual immaturity. So Ray Garrity is a virgin, and this is spoken about a lot in the book. It's quite sanitized in the film. In the film, they do not really talk about their sexual exploits, you know, and what they hope for sexually in the future. And things like that. Whereas in the book, it just goes on and on and on. And I have to admit, like when I was first listening to it on the audiobook, it was a bit shocking, really. And I was just thinking to myself, is this how all 18-year-old boys think constantly? Because, you know, like they're walking past crowds, and, you know, Ray is like eyeing up the size of the bust or trying to look up the skirt of you know, the girls that are on the walk. And he actually breaks away from the crowd and kisses a girl, like right at the beginning of the book, and, you know, he's describing how he's sticking his tongue down her throat, and none of this is happening in the film. And I think this also leads on to one of the other differences. So in the film, Ray says he doesn't have a girlfriend, but in the book he does have a girlfriend called Jan, and Jan is a really big motivator in the book for Ray to keep going on with the walk. When he's feeling like he can't carry on anymore, he just keeps thinking, you know, I'm going to meet Jan, I'm going to meet Jan in Freeport, you know, and he wants to get to the end of it, quite frankly, because he wants to lose his virginity. You know, and he talks about how he had tried to lose his virginity with Jan, I think, before he went on the walk, and she had said, no, but maybe if you get through the long walk or whatever, then we can when you get back, you know. So sex is a big motivator for Ray Garrity, and it motivated him, you know, to the crowd to kiss that other girl. And then he actually sees his girlfriend and his mum as spectators, you know, and he wants to run to them as well in the crowd. And yeah, the fact that Jan is such a big motivator for this character, and the sex is such a big motivator, kind of is a big part of Ray Garrity, and I think that showcases his age. You know, he is a teenage boy, and you know, like, it probably is quite realistic that that's what he might be thinking, like, through the walk. There's also a lot of discussion as well, as he's beginning to suffer more and more and more, you know, about his sexual fantasies as well. Which again, I think myself, I found that quite a hard listen and a hard read, because I didn't really want to know about it, but it is part of the character. And none of that is happening in the film at all. As I say, they've made Garrity out to be a right goody two shoes, who's just there to serve everybody, and you know, he doesn't want to step on anybody's toes. And I don't think that's actually really his character. And so I think I preferred the character in the book, even if those fantasies and stuff were hard to read about. And part of me was just like, oh, you know, grow up. But he's only 18 years old, so I wouldn't expect him to be that much more mature. There's another section in the book as well, where there's a bridge collapse, and the characters are all really excited that they might get a break. And again, that doesn't happen in the film. There's a lad in the film called, not in the film, sorry, in the book, there's a boy called Percy. And I found him quite sad as a character, but he's not really covered in the film either. And Percy is a real mama's boy. He gets there and his mum is sort of helicoptering around him. And then, you know, he talks about his mother a fair bit. And then it's not too far into it, really. Percy sort of he just can't take the mental torture anymore of what he's doing. And I don't think that he thinks that he's going to make it to the finish line. So he actually comes up with what he thinks is a cunning plan. And he thinks, if I break away into the forest while I'm en route, then I'll be able to avoid getting shot, and I can run away and I can escape. You know, and why not? So he tries to do that, but obviously he doesn't escape and he just gets gunned down. And then later on, his mother is looking for him. She's one of the spectators and she's shouting out for him, and Garrity actually recognises her and is like, oh well, you know, Percy's not coming home because her worst fear has been, you know, realised, and he's been gunned down to death. And I think that whole sort of storyline with Percy, I found quite sad to read, but it sort of affected me a little bit. So I thought that they could have included that in the film, and they didn't. Now, they do have one scene where one of the boys, I'm not sure which one it is, I mean, it could have been Percy, I don't know, but they didn't really make a big deal of that character in the film. He tries to escape by running into a shop, and he gets shot down. So I think that that's sort of the version of that scene in the book where Percy was trying to run into the woods. So I suppose one of the other big things that we need to talk about is the difference in the finale. So in the book, there's three characters that make it through sort of close to the end, and you've got McVrees, Stebbins, and Garrity. So Garrity is our main character, and McVrees is sort of who his best friend throughout the walk. You know, his buddy that he keeps coming back to for reassurance. Now, Stebbins is quite an annoying character to everybody. He seems to know everything there ever was to know about the long walk, and he keeps just telling everybody how he's going to beat everybody, and gets up people's noses, really. But it does get obviously revealed at the end that the Major, who is the architect of this long walk, and who appears at various points to goad the walkers on, is his father. And so it's actually quite sad. Everybody hates Stebbins throughout the whole film and the whole book, but actually you can sort of see that all Stebbins is trying to do is get his father's approval in a way, because he doesn't think that the Major knows that he's his father. So Stebbins grew up without him and had discovered he was his father later on. So I think that, you know, this was obviously Stebbins' way of trying to get his dad to respect him, thinking if he could win the long walk, then his dad would, you know, want a relationship with him. But this obviously doesn't happen. In the film, Stebbins is the third to last person to die. But in the book, Stebbins is the second to last character to die. And here's the big thing. In the book, Ray Garrity wins. So McFreeze dies third to last, Stebbins dies second to last, and Garrity doesn't die. He's the winner. Whereas in the film, you have Stebbins dies, and then Garrity dies, and then McFreeze wins. And then the other thing is, when Garrity actually wins, Garrity doesn't know that he's won. He actually sees the Major coming at him, and he can't believe that he's actually won, and so he starts running in the opposite direction, which I would say is, you know, you're probably pretty traumatised after watching 99 other people get shot down or die in a variety of ways. You know, they haven't had any sleep for, like, proper sleep for nights, because they can't sleep on this walk, they've just got to keep walking. Some of them have managed to sleepwalk a little bit while they were, you know, walking, but you know, they're probably not fed enough either. Absolutely exhausted. You know, most of them aren't even wearing shoes by the time they finish. So obviously I'd say that Garrity is having a trauma response, and just runs in the opposite direction. And you never find out what his wish is, like what he wants from winning the competition. In the film, McFreeze wins, and McFreeze is aware that he's won, but he decides to avenge the others, and he makes his final wish and asks for one of the carbines, which I never actually heard that word before till I read this book, but I think he means the machine guns that are being used to gun the contestants down. So he said that that's what he wants, and he wants a specific carbine from, you know, the guard that's nearest to him, and he uses that to gun down the Major. And that's his final, I've got you back for everything that you've put us through. Now, it seemed like in the film a very Hollywood ending. You know, it's like gone down in firepower or whatever, you know, and there's been a sweet revenge. Whereas I think the book was a little bit more subtle in the, how should I put it, in Garrity's response. I don't think we were ever really needed to know what Garrity wished for, because I don't even think we really know why Garrity's doing the walk in the first place. And so, whilst they have all endured a lot, I don't think that gunning down the Major was the best ending, if I'm honest. I don't think I just kind of rolled my eyes, if I'm honest, in the cinema when that happened, and just thought, yeah, I should have expected something like this. But I kind of like the subtle ambiguity in the book, you know, because we don't really know what happens to Ray in the book. We know that he's won, but we don't know how he resolves the trauma that he's been through. We don't know what he wishes for. We don't know anything about it. And I was okay with that ending, if I'm honest. I really didn't enjoy the fact that McFreeze won instead of Garrity as well in the film. You know, I mean, Garrity is our main character. He's the person that we're following. He's the person that Stephen King decided was going to win in the book. So I'm not really sure why we had to kill Garrity off and have McFreeze win instead, other than so McFreeze could avenge Garrity. Yeah, that ending, it was okay. It was okay, but I have to admit, I just don't think I'd be bothered to watch the film again. I'd be quite happy to read the book again, just not the film. And I think that what came through in the book, because we were in Garrity's head constantly, you know, he's talking from, you know, mile 1 up until the end where he, you know, runs past the Major. He's talking about every little thing that's going on. So he's talking about the countryside, he's talking about how his feet feel, every single little muscle spasm that he has, every urge he has to go to the toilet, every sexual urge he has, everything, you know, that's happened to him as he's been growing up that sort of influenced him. He talks about his dreams for his future. He's thinking about his dreams for his future, you know, and a lot of that revolves around Jan, if I'm honest. But that's, again, probably like down to his age. So we have a really good idea of how Garrity's feeling throughout the book, who he is as a person, you know, and what he wants. The only thing that we don't really know is actually what his wish is for doing the long walk. Whereas in the film, because we're not in Garrity's head and it sort of panned out watching them all walk, you know, through various different terrains, we don't really understand Garrity as much as as a person. I think we have a much more rounded image of Garrity as a person in the book than we do compared to the film. I think also in the book we have more awareness of where the characters are, because obviously Garrity's given a running commentary of which city they're in, how far they are away from the next city, whereas in the film it's sort of timeless in the way that they've shot it, because you really don't know where they are from the landmarks, and quite often there's barely any supporters in the film, whereas there were more supporters sort of described in the book when they got to various places. But you know, you couldn't really tell that from the film. It would always seem to be like empty countryside around them where they were walking, and you know, maybe that was just done so you could concentrate on the characters' conversations and the shootings. Whereas I felt in the book the whole scene was described, you knew a lot more of what was sort of going on. And as I'd mentioned before, there was a bridge collapse at the beginning of the book, and you could just tell how relieved Garrity was, thinking, oh, we're going to get a sit down, we might get a sit down, you know, just begging for that. And you don't really get in the film how exhausted Garrity is. Like, a lot of the main characters, you know, it's ticking up miles in the film, going, oh yeah, they're at 500 miles now. And there were a couple of people that are screaming because they're in pain. Their bodies have, you know, gone against them. Like, one guy has a brain hemorrhage from walking too much. Another guy just gets partially run over by one of the tanks that's following them, so he's unable to walk. Some of them just simply mentally can't go on anymore, you know, and so you get a little bit of a hint of the suffering, but McVrees and Garrity, you don't really see that from them. They all seem to be fine. You get a bit, oh, I'm a little bit tired sort of thing, but you don't get how truly exhausted they actually are and how that's really mentally affecting them. Whereas in the book, I think that you get a far more in-depth view of that. I personally think now, after having listened to The Long Walk, watched The Long Walk, and read The Long Walk, that The Long Walk is some kind of metaphor for life. You know, they have started out on this journey, and they're young and they're impressionable, and you know, in a way they have chosen to be on this walk, but they haven't really chosen. It was sort of expected of them to be there, and they don't really know what the future holds, and the only ending to the journey that they're on is death, which is a bit like life. And in the book, because we understand, you know, a little bit more about Garrity's sexual immaturity and things like that, we can sort of see things happening as he's going through the walk, where he's sort of ticking off milestones in his life. So, you know, at the beginning he's like, he wants to lose his virginity. Then he comes across a girl that he sort of kisses, but obviously hasn't got time to do much more than that. But he does, he sort of shares a kiss with her. You have people who just bow out because mentally they can't take it anymore, and that obviously happens in life. You have people with illnesses that have to bow out because they've got no choice, they just die, and that also happens along the way. There are some that essentially, I'd say, basically commit suicide in this story, either because they know that they're ill and they can't make it to the end line, so they don't want to just die on their feet. They'd rather just get it over and done with and get shot quickly, you know. And then there are others that mentally know, like, I can't do it anymore, just get it over and done with. I can't be in my own head anymore while I'm doing this. You know, and again, that's sort of realistic to life as well. There is one of the characters is married, and he actually dies during the walk, and they talk about how they might help support his wife now that he is deceased. And again, I think that is something that happens in real life, you know, like especially when you're young and someone, you know, close to your age dies, it does affect you quite a bit, and there's all that thinking about, you know, well, how do we support their partner if they're still alive. And then there's the whole questioning of, you know, what's going to go next? Can I really go on? And I just think a lot of it does actually relate to the journey of life, what they go through on this walk. Even with the bridge collapsing and him thinking, you know, oh, maybe I can have a sit down, like I've had enough. Again, like we get that in life, you know, you have to just take a break occasionally because you're like, you know, I can't go on, I need to, you know, sit down. So I think overall, when it comes to the human condition and describing that, and describing the different sort of personalities that, you know, come into your life. For example, you've got I think it was Barkovich, who's a bit of a bully, and then you've got Percy, who's a bit of a mama's boy, and you've got Stebbins, who's a bit of a know-all, and then you've got McVrees, which is your ride or die friend. You know, again, you have all of these characters in your life, you know, and in the long walk, they're all there for Garrity to sort of experience on his journey. And I think that in the book you really get a sense of, you know, this is sort of like a bit of a metaphor for life, really. Whereas in the book, I think, I mean, in the film, the emphasis was more on showcasing the firepower that was killing them, if I'm honest. And that sort of put me off the film a bit. It's clearly in the book. They discuss people getting shot in the book, but it doesn't seem to be the main highlight or function in the book is to concentrate on, you know, the guns and what they're doing. It's more about on the characters. So I'm trying to think if there's any other sort of points that I want to make about the film and the book. Don't really think so. But I did definitely enjoy the book more than the film. I just thought that it was more rounded. I thought Garrity's character came off better, and you know, I really enjoyed the fact that Garrity won in the book. You really wanted him to, after you know, were in his head for, you know, the whole walk, listening to his suffering. I think the one thing that I would like to know, which I didn't really get from the book or the film, is how far that they actually walked. Because in my mind, when I was reading the book, I felt like there was about 2 to 3 nights had passed, which sort of would have led them to like maybe 300 to 350 miles, maybe, because they started in the morning on the one day and then it ended, I think, in the dark on the last day. But I wasn't really counting, but that to me seemed, you know, not reasonable. It's not reasonable to try and walk, you know, 300 miles. But I felt like with the amount of sleep that they'd have got and the fact that they were constantly on the go, and how many sort of nights I felt Garrity had described, it felt like maybe he had done that amount of mileage. But then in the film it takes up to over 500 miles, I think. So yeah, that was quite unbelievable. I think you had like the walking speed thing in the book, which was like they were going to do 4 miles per hour, and that was fairly unbelievable, and I had to just sort of ignore that figure and suspend my disbelief of that, to be honest, when I was reading the book. And then in the film, when I saw that, you know, it was saying they had gone over 500 miles, it was the same. I had to sort of suspend my disbelief on that, because I was like, I don't know that a human could do that if they had not had any sleep, then that they were constantly moving, which would have been, you know, days and days and days trying to do that. So, but overall, I really enjoyed The Long Walk as a book. It's definitely a book that I would come back to. It's sort of like a coming of age story in a weird way, as well as being a little bit dystopian. The film, however, I didn't really feel like it did justice to the book, and I probably wouldn't be bothered to watch it again, although I'm glad I saw it once. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm pretty sure everybody's got an opinion on this who's read the book and the film, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you for listening to the video, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Bye!